63 years old and I still sleep with one eye open. My late wife Marka used to say that about me. Gavin Pierce, you'd hear a moth sneeze in a thunderstorm. She used to laugh when she said it too. Said I noticed things other people missed. That was why the phone call bothered me immediately. It came at 12:04 in the morning on a cold Thursday in November, and the second I saw my oldest son's name on the screen, something tightened in my chest. Dominic never called late, not after his mother died. He was the type to send birthday cards early and show up 15 minutes before appointments. Careful, disciplined, predictable. So when I answered and heard his voice, I knew something was wrong before he even spoke. "Don't ask questions," he said quietly. "Just listen carefully, turn off every light in the house, don't touch your computer, go up to the attic and lock yourself inside." Then he paused. "And whatever you do, you don't tell Tristan." That sentence drained every bit of warmth out of my body. Tristan Hale was my son-in-law, my daughter Delilah's husband of 9 years, and at that exact moment, he was asleep in my guest bedroom. At least I thought he was. I moved through the house in darkness, every floorboard sounding louder than normal, past the family pictures, past Marsha's old cross-stitch hanging near the hallway. Home is where the heart is. Funny how words can become painful after someone's gone. I climbed into the attic, locked the door and sat among old boxes and winter coats, trying to understand why my son sounded like a man preparing for war. Then I noticed a warped section in the attic floor. There was a narrow crack between the boards, and through it, I could see directly into the guest bedroom below. The lamp clicked on. Tristan stood in the middle of the room, fully dressed except for his shoes, checking his watch, like he'd been waiting for a specific moment. Calm, prepared. He walked across the room toward an old chair that had belonged to Marsha's mother and slid it aside with disturbing ease. Then he pressed against the baseboard. A hidden panel lifted open. My blood turned to ice. I had lived in that house for 26 years. I built half of it myself, and I had never seen that safe before. Tristan opened it like a man who had practiced. Inside was a thick folder. He sat on the bed and began photographing documents page by page with his phone. Then the top sheet tilted toward the light. Last will and testament. Marsha Elaine Pierce. My hand stopped working for a second, because Marsha already had a will. We signed it together years ago. I remembered the attorney's office, remembered holding her hand while chemo made her fingers shake. So why was my son-in-law hiding another copy inside a secret safe in my house? And why was he photographing it in the middle of the night? That was when another memory hit me. Dominic going to prison 8 years earlier. Wire fraud, a case that moved too fast and made too little sense. He served 22 months before somehow rebuilding his life and eventually joining the FBI. At the time, I thought my son had turned pain into purpose. Sitting in that attic staring down at Tristan Hale, I realized something much worse. Maybe Dominic hadn't joined the FBI to move on. Maybe he joined because he never stopped hunting. And down below me, the man I'd been feeding pot roast and bourbon for 4 straight days had no idea the trap was finally closing. If stories about betrayal, revenge, and family secrets pull you in, subscribe now, because some people hide monsters behind perfect smiles, and those stories deserve to be told. I stayed in that attic until dawn, wondering one thing over and over. How long had Tristan been planning this? Dominic texted me just before sunrise. "Come outside, quietly." I slipped through the side door in my slippers and crossed the freezing yard toward a grey SUV parked 2 houses down. My son was sitting behind the wheel, looking 10 years older than he should have. There was a thick file folder on his lap, the kind that changes lives. The second I got inside, I looked at him and said, "I made that man pot roast." For the first time all night, Dominic almost smiled. "I know, Dad." Then he told me everything. The fake will wasn't the beginning. It was the backup plan. Years earlier, Tristan had found someone inside the law office handling Marsha's estate and paid them to replace the original documents before filing. The real will vanished. The forged one cut Dominic almost completely out of the inheritance, while Delilah's portion quietly grew larger, which meant Tristan controlled nearly all of it through her. But money alone hadn't been enough for him. He wanted Dominic gone too. That was the part that made my stomach turn. The wire fraud case had been manufactured from the ground up. Fake transactions, shell accounts, fabricated records pointing directly at my son. Dresden and one of his college friends built the entire thing carefully enough to survive federal review. And it worked. Dominic went to prison, while Tristan sat beside my daughter, smiling through Sunday dinners and Christmas photos. "What kind of man plans something like that?" I asked quietly. Dominic stared through the windshield. "The kind who plans before he proposes." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Before Tristan ever asked Delilah to marry him, he had already started building the destruction of her brother's life. I sat there speechless, while morning light slowly crept across the dashboard. Then Dominic explained why he'd stayed silent for so long. He'd spent years rebuilding the case piece by piece after joining the FBI. Not officially at first, unofficially, quietly. Every lead brought him closer to Tristan, but never close enough for an arrest. Until the safe. Tristan had kept the original will hidden as leverage, in case anyone ever turned against him. Greed made him careless, and greedy people eventually touched the evidence themselves. That was why Dominic waited. He needed Tristan caught accessing it. "You used my house as bait," I said. Dominic shook his head slowly. "No, I used his arrogance. And somehow hearing that made me prouder than angry, because my son had every reason to become bitter after prison. Instead, he became patient, careful, precise, the way hunters become after surviving something that should have destroyed them. The next night was Tristan and Delilah's anniversary dinner. Downtown Raleigh, fancy restaurant, 8 guests, candles, wine, expensive silverware, and Dominic planned to end everything in front of all of them. By Saturday evening, I could barely recognize myself in the mirror. I was calm on the outside. Inside, I felt like a live wire. Tristan spent the morning walking around my kitchen like nothing in the world was wrong, drinking coffee, checking emails, asking me if I thought Delilah would like the restaurant he picked. Every word out of his mouth made me want to throw him through the window. But I smiled. I nodded, and I waited. Because for once, the waiting wasn't hurting us anymore. It was hurting him. That restaurant looked exactly like the kind of place Tristan loved. Dim lights, white tablecloths, the sort of room where rich people talk quietly so everyone else notices them. Delilah looked beautiful when she arrived. That part nearly broke me, because she was happy, completely unaware that her entire marriage was hanging over a cliff. Sienna arrived next. Marcia had always trusted her like family, and now I understood why. She squeezed my hand once and whispered, "Tonight ends it." Then Tristan walked in. Confident, perfect smile, working the room like a politician at a fundraiser. Watching him laugh with people who had no idea who he really was made my skin crawl. But the worst part? He truly believed he was untouchable. And that confidence stayed on his face right up until Dominic walked through the restaurant doors. Everything changed slowly at first. A few people noticed the 2 agents behind him. Then more heads turned. Then silence spread table by table across the dining room. Tristan turned around, and I watched the blood leave his face. Not panic, recognition, like a man finally seeing the bill for something he ordered years ago. Dominic stopped beside the table. Calm, cold, controlled. "Tristan Hale," he said evenly. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud against a federal investigation." The entire restaurant froze. Delilah stared at Dominic like she couldn't process the words. Tristan tried to recover fast. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. But Dominic didn't even blink. "I have the original will," he replied. That ended it. You could actually see the fight leave Tristan's body. Not because he was innocent, because he finally understood he'd lost. The agent stepped forward with handcuffs, and for the first time in 8 years, I looked at that man without feeling powerless. If you've ever watched someone destroy a family while pretending to love it, subscribe, because the truth always waits patiently for its turn. The cuffs clicked shut, and the performance was finally over. Nobody at the table moved for several seconds after Tristan was taken away. The candles still flickered. The food still steamed on untouched plates, but the entire room felt different now, like somebody had finally opened a window after years of bad air. Delilah sat perfectly still, staring down at the white tablecloth. Then she finally looked at Dominic. "How long?" she asked softly. 8 years, he answered. Not angry, not proud, just tired. The kind of tired that settles into a person after carrying something heavy for too long. I watched my daughter process the last decade of her life in silence. Every holiday, every anniversary, Every family picture with Tristan smiling beside her while hiding what he'd done. That realization hit her harder than the arrest itself. Then her eyes found me. "Daddy!" That one word nearly broke me. I got up immediately and wrapped my arms around her, the same way I used to when thunderstorms scared her as a little girl. And for a few seconds she let herself fall apart. Just briefly. Because she was still Marsha's daughter, strong even when her heart was splitting open. Then she pulled back, wiped her face, and looked around the table. "You know what's crazy?" she said quietly. "What?" "I'm actually hungry." For a second, nobody knew how to respond. Then Sienna laughed. A real laugh. Small, emotional, exhausted. And somehow that broke the tension enough for all of us to breathe again. So we stayed. We ate dinner. Not because the night was normal again, but because Tristan didn't deserve to own one more memory from this family. 3 weeks later, I stood alone in my kitchen early one December morning with coffee brewing behind me. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that finally feels peaceful instead of lonely. On the counter sat a green folder with Marsha's handwriting across the tab. Important. Inside was the restored original will. Filed correctly. Verified. My son's name finally back where it belonged. I placed my hand on the folder and looked toward the hallway where Marsha's old cross-stitch still hung. Home is where the heart is. For the first time in years, those words didn't hurt quite as much. "We got him, sweetheart," I said softly into the empty kitchen. Outside, the oak trees swayed in the cold morning wind, while the first bird of the day started making noise. And standing there with fresh coffee in my hands, I realized something. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly, but when it finally does, it tastes a whole lot like peace.